going to get some work done on our next project, which is 2-point perspective. We have used 1-point perspective in the past, and I'm going to show you some examples so that I can remind you of what we've done. And then we're going to work with 2-point perspective on this next couple of assignments. So in 4th grade, we talked about 1-point perspective. And you can see how this drawing is lined off. And here is a photograph that indicates 1-point perspective with that one vanishing point. If you remember, we started with this kind of a format, and then we made this nice little barn scene with that 1-point perspective of the whole field leading back to the barn. So now we're going to talk about 2-point perspective. So as you can see here, this uses 2-point perspective, and that's what we're going to be working with on this project. So here is a corner of a building, and they've taken it all down to one perspective point and then down to the other. You can see over here that the perspective points are even off the page, but it still uses those perspective points. And this is how we can draw things that actually look further away in space accurately. So you can see over here how they still use the horizon line, just like we did in the other one. And they use the corners of these boxes to draw the sides accurately to the perspective points so they look three-dimensional. So if we look at examples of artwork throughout history, we see that there's a very immature use of perspective, especially through the medieval period. And then in the 14th, 15th century, when Renaissance came along, especially the Italian Renaissance, that's when they really started to grasp an understanding of perspective, and they started to teach it in their schools. So let's take a look at some of those examples. The early ones are pretty funny. This one is the birth of John the Baptist, 1454. So during the medieval period, they believed that the larger objects in a painting were the most important. Kings, queens, princes, saints, like St. John the Baptist in that particular picture. They had no idea that things get smaller as they move further away in space. And so that's where some of the perspective looks off. If you look at that previous painting, John the Baptist's mother is very large, even though she is in the background. And look at John the Baptist himself. He is a brand new newborn baby who stands about 4 feet tall. So it's very interesting to look back at some of this perspective. Also, look at the fireplace. It's extremely shallow, and so there's no understanding of how that perspective works. This painting seems to have 3 perspective points, even though it should have 1 in that room. The bed has 1, the tiles on the floor have 1, and the fireplace has a 3rd. So everything's skewed. Now this painting is from the Renaissance. It's called The Ideal City, and you can see how absolutely perfect it is. And this is a painting by Raphael of the School of Athens from the 1500s. And here's a painting from 1633, the late Renaissance, and you can see how that perspective is absolutely perfected. We're going to do 2 different projects using 2-point perspective. This I call a starburst, and it just gets you used to using 2 perspective points and converging those lines to those 2 perspective points. And then we'll do another project that looks a little bit more realistic. So let's get started. Okay, so we're going to start off simple enough. We are just going to draw a horizon line. But first, let's put 2 points in there. So you're going to put 1 perspective point on one side of the paper and 1 perspective point on the other side of the paper. And then just use a ruler to connect those 2 points. Remember, draw lightly. Then on top, we're going to put 3 dots somewhere on the paper. They could even be past the perspective point. They could be in the center. They could be wherever you want them. Then on the bottom, we're going to put 4, just for something different. 1, 2, 3, and 4. All right, easy enough. Now, on each dot, you're going to connect it to both perspective points. So say I take this one first. I'm going to hold my ruler so that it connects this dot, and I'm going to draw a line. That's one. And then remember the other perspective point right here, and draw another line. So I'm going to do that with each dot. And you know these lines are going to overlap, but that's okay. We're trying to get the idea that we're going to use both perspective points. All right? So I'll give you some time to work on that. Okay, there we go. Simple enough. We're going to start with simple steps and then we'll work to the more difficult. So our next step is to outline it with a Sharpie. I'm going to also use the ruler when I outline it with the Sharpie. All right, I am not perfect, and I know that if I don't use a ruler, then I'm going to mess things up. And that's going to become super important in this assignment because we're looking for a little bit of accuracy with our perspective. So we'll just trace that line along the ruler and do that with all the rest of them also. Okay, I traced all the lines with my Sharpie. Next step is erase the pencil lines. Then your next step is to fill every single space with a different kind of pattern. And we're going to add some color to that too. So draw lightly with pencil. Like you could use circles as a pattern. So I could make small and large circles just within that space. I'm going to keep it simple and fill it up. But some people do like to use those perspective points just for the fun of it and just start giving it a try. So maybe you can use this point to kind of make some lines that converge to that perspective point, and that can be your pattern. All right, and we'll go back and color that. All these different patterns on here, you might want this one even to have wavy lines so that you have those wavy lines that contrast with the straight lines. You could have checkerboards. You can have all kinds of things, little paisleys. All right. And then we're going to color those patterns in. Here's another starburst with some different ideas. And finally, it will be completely full of color in the background and the foreground. And each square or triangle will have a different pattern. And you can play around with some good contrasting colors too. Remember, no extra points for messy craftsmanship. All right, you can get these things started, then color them in neatly. You should be able to color in the lines and color in a nice pattern. A lot of times you may start a pattern, like say I start with these circles with my pencil, and then I'm like, okay, I got this. And then you can just do it with marker. You guys are old enough now that you can kind of monitor yourself. Something like this that was a lot more complicated, I certainly did in pencil first, and then I jumped in with the marker. So you decide, as long as you keep it neat and tidy and have good craftsmanship. See you later.